what I found quite by accident was when I wrote my first book, um, when I told people I was writing a book, so I couldn't come to their event, they'd be like, oh, well, yeah, I totally get that. I was like, all right, write it down on the word processor, my book by blah, blah, blah. And there you've started your book. And so you say, I can't, I'm working on my book. You're working on yourself. And you need to create that time for yourself without feeling guilty, without feeling like you're letting someone down. Um, Put yourself first, I would say. Huge.
Há quem veja o invisível, há quem faça o impossível. Depois de tudo, alguma coisa vem dizer que tudo bem.
Welcome to the Menopause Retro Journeys. It's a series where I get together with women from all walks of life and different backgrounds, and we get to share and go back to their menopause years. We share their stories, the ups and downs, and not only, I want to know about the little gems and the little wisdom nuggets that these women have extracted during their menopause experience. And I want to spot the new ways of being that emerge after menopause that mark in many ways the beginning of the second half of their lives. So this usually is something that we can, that's why it's called Retro Journeys. We look back. So let's get started. We kind of like, we're going to connect some dots. And I'm your host, Ioanna Matsouli. I am the creator of the Menopause Codex, and today my dear guest is all the way from Hawaii, Lynette Sheppard. So, author of Becoming a Menopause Goddess, Lynette Sheppard hosts the popular Menopause Goddess blog. This virtual community brings women together to share wisdom, humor, and heart to help their sisters through the transitions of menopause, midlife, and more. Menopause Goddess blog has been awarded top menopause blog honors by Healthline for over 6 years. It's true that I think it's your blog is the only one that I've seen that is purely an individual woman running a blog for years and not being linked to products, to company, to some initiative. It's great. She brings her expertise as a registered nurse, as well as her experiences as a woman completely blindsided by the change to help others have a smoother menopause journey. So, Lynette, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Happy to join you.
Yes. So let's dive in, and I just tell me, how did menopause? How did it start? How did she turn up in your life? What was the...
Well, I started having pretty much horrible hot flashes, and I had no idea they would feel so dramatic. And I had horrible hot flashes. I was anxious. I couldn't sleep at night, all kinds of things that had never happened to me before. And luckily, my girlfriend, one of my best friends, was going through the same thing at the same time. And we were wondering, is it just us? Is there something wrong with us that we need to have checked out? Or is this normal? So being proactive women, we got together a group of women for what we called a slumber party with a focus. And we invited them to Lake Tahoe for a long weekend to say, okay, we're all of a certain age. Is anybody else going through this? And it turned out, yes, everybody was, to varying degrees. Some women had more emotional symptoms. Some of us had more physical symptoms. But across the board, we were all shocked, shall we say. And two of us were nurses, and we were shocked because no one teaches you about that. I
Yeah,
guess they don't think it's important.
that's one of my questions, because as a nurse, one would expect that you would know more about these things, right?
Absolutely. I thought, I think there was in a 1,300-page textbook on women's health, I think there was one sentence about menopause. And it's not much better now because my son-in-law is a nurse and he had a paragraph, I think, in his big textbook. So clearly not enough attention was being paid to us. And we felt like we were starting out on a journey that had no map, no signposts, nothing. We were going to have to figure it out for ourselves.
Yeah. And plus you come from like I guess from your mother and I don't know, from your lineage, did you have any, but did some woman close to you that was an elder, did you have any information? Did you have anything, or they talked about their experience, or how was it?
Yes, they often say that your experience will mimic your mother's or your grandmother's. Unfortunately, mothers that were, giving birth in the 50s, like my mother and my girlfriend's mother, and basically the whole group of us, they were given hormones before they could say they were hot. Just
Okay.
that was what was done. So they didn't know what their menopause experience was. They never actually got to feel it. I talked to my mom and said, Mom, what was that like for you? And she goes, I don't think I really noticed it. And so you can see by suppressing the symptoms before they start, we really had no roadmap. We didn't have our moms to turn to. And when we talked to our physicians at that time, they were just like, well, we can give you hormones.
Okay.
And
And
and around that same time is when the women's health initiative came out, and women got really frightened about taking hormones.
yeah, okay. Okay. Yeah, you're the boomer generation, right? That the beginning of, or even the first, I'd say, generation of women that started talking or dealing with it. But more, what was amazing about
Mm-hmm.
your case was that you got together and you said you went to Lake Tahoe. And how many of you were you? I mean, how did you, how
Yeah.
it's quite a thing, because from what a bit I read on your blog, you were saying that up to that point, that was relationship was quite a discovery for you, because up to that point you were used to doing things on your own. So tell me about that, and tell me about the Venuses, and tell me also about the lost art of women supporting each other and sharing, because that's what you somehow restored and put together. Yeah.
Yeah. So realizing that we were on our own and that we'd have to try to figure this out for ourselves. And, we are my parents' generation was called the silent generation. Well, if they're the silent generation, we're the noisy generation. We want to know, we want to dig it up, we want to figure it out. We're not going to go quietly.
Yeah.
So we actually invited some women who invited some women who invited some women, and we ended up with 15 of our core group. And we sent out a 30-page questionnaire, or a 30-question questionnaire, just talking about everything. Are you having symptoms? How are you feeling with your relationships? All the way to, what do you wish you'd known sooner about your life, about kids, about relationship, all of that. And we got quite a bit of varied answers, but a lot of it was, I think what we wanted to do was start the meeting before the meeting started, so that we were kind of on the same page. And we had some icebreaker exercises that we thought, well, we'll get everybody to kind of know each other, because not everyone knew each other. But it took like 2 minutes. The minute women came in the door, they started saying, oh my God, this is happening to me. Is that happening to you? How is that for you? What? We didn't need the exercises. We didn't need anything. I mean, we were all trying to figure out what's going on. What do we do about it? How do we traverse this in an elegant fashion? And because we sensed that you could. We felt that there's no better no better resource than women sort of, metaphorically sitting around the fire, sharing their stories, sharing what they know, learning together. And that way, there was definitely a synergy so that our learning curve went like this. I mean, together, we pooled our resources. What have you tried? What did you learn? And we met again. We met for maybe 10 years, once a year. But we would work on things that we had decided upon in between. So to your earlier statement, we drifted from the crisis of menopause and the symptoms and symptom relief to how do we create new relationships with others and ourselves? What's our vision for the second half of our life? Or what gifts are being given to us through this?
Brilliant. So yeah, I mean, the first thing is like when you get together, you talk about the symptoms. That's the first thing, because the symptom is what you see, and but you literally manage to go back to the source of some of those things. And so what were some of the, maybe once, I guess your first meeting was all about symptoms and everything. And then I remember you saying when we met last time that it was important for your meetings to have a focus so that you could to create this synergy, to be able to have something that connects everybody. So at any given moment, you can always go back to it, because I guess 15 women together and women talking and going wild and unleashing everything. So I guess it's got to have some focus. So yeah, tell me about this. Tell me about the focus, and how was it that you only met once a year? That's actually another question I had, because it's not like, say, let's meet every month or let's meet every week and talk about these things. It seems, which I find is amazing, and I find it's very just, because in that, I find with myself as well, we need the silence, we need the connection and the support, but we also need the time to figure it out, because it's a call back to yourself, right? So I don't know.
I think that was accidental in a way, just because we were bringing people from all over the United States to a location that was easy for people to get to. And we had the space. So it was sort of centrally located. But everybody had busy lives, as you can imagine. So it ended up being once a year. But in terms of a focus, we had an agenda for each meeting, and we actually wrote and typed that up. So the agenda for the first meeting obviously was, let's get to know each other. Physical symptoms, what are you doing? What's helping? What isn't helping? Emotional symptoms, what's happening? What's helping? What's not? And then the second meeting, the focus was very clearly on relationship, because with the upheaval that happens with menopause, it feels like you're becoming a different person. And so with that, how are your relationships changing? Obviously, it is natural to think, if you're irritated or sad, that something out there is causing that. Maybe your significant other or your children. But in point of fact, if we can pull back and talk to each other as women around the fire, we can say, oh, maybe that's something that's happening with us right now, because that didn't happen before. How can we slow it down enough to see what's really a problem outside ourselves? And how can we be compassionate with ourselves to say, oh, I'm quick to anger, or I'm more sad than I used to be. So, and then the most important relationship we talked about intimate relationship, and a lot of women were experiencing vaginal dryness, and sex was becoming uncomfortable. Libido had sort of taken a permanent vacation, it seemed. So how do we work that with our intimate partner? And we we came up with some ideas and solutions. But the most important relationship we needed to work on was our relationship with ourselves. Who is that new person? Who is she becoming? What will she be? Yes, it's appropriate to grieve the loss of fertility, but there's a new fertility that's about to unfold. And what is that going to look like? How am I going to birth whatever is coming forth? You grieve the loss, but then you go, okay, but what's coming in? What am I being given now? That is, so that was, I think, our third meeting was actually a week-long meeting in Hawaii. And so we talked about a lot of things in that meeting, and relationship was big. Work and what are we going to do is big, but a very large piece that happened by accident was, dealing with anger, dealing with sadness, because we now had an extended period of time and certain things the universe manifested for us to sort of illuminate for us old patterns, old ways of being, maybe ways that we didn't want to be anymore. And we did quite a few exercises, one of which involved writing down all the roles we were on little slips of paper. And that would be mother, aunt, sister, nurse, friend, artist, all of the roles. And then put them all down and get rid of them. And feel what that feels like. So you're a clean slate. Which ones are you going to pick back up, and which ones no longer serve you and you leave them? And that was it sounds simple. It's very emotional.
How
exercise.
was it for you? How was this exercise for you?
Yeah, so for me, the identity of nurse was no longer important. So I didn't really need to pick that one back up. Although I still think of myself as a healer. That's a bigger, broader thing than nurse. I left a sister because my siblings have all passed. So I had to let go of that one. That was harder. But I rapidly picked up artist and writer and kept those close. So that's what I remember. It was very emotional for some people because it's hard to let go of some of the roles you have played, helper, giver. There were plenty of tears. It was really interesting. When you think of, and of course it's a metaphor. So are you really giving those things up? But it just lets you know, what are you attached to? What's important? And it gives you a beginning point for what's the second half of your life going to be like.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. It's I like the work that I do is more along those lines. So it's more once, say, you find some ways to address your symptoms, because the physicality is a big one. So let's face it.
Oh yeah.
Whatever. I mean, we have many different, and it can be small for someone or huge for another woman. So for sure, this is the first one that comes, that emerges. But then underneath, there's all this deeper stuff, and there's a purging, there's a shedding that happens, and there's things that no longer serve us, but we hold on to them. And it's this holding on nearly, I think, that creates all the anxiety and the stress and that's what, because the whole process is not just physical, wants you to release all this, and at the same time it's not an easy thing, so we hold on to it, and then it's this internal conflict and fight, and I don't know, who do you think wins in the end? Menopause or us? I don't know.
Oh well, judging from our 15 women who definitely say they aren't sure they would have survived menopause in the same way, and that we felt like we all thrived, and it was hugely because of one another. So I do think we win in the end. But I think it's, at the time we started gathering information, it seemed like there were two kinds of books. There was the big, heavy medical, blah, blah, blah book about this is what happens to your body, which, and then there was the books that say, oh, it's the best time of your life. And you're like, well, it doesn't freaking feel like the best time of my life. It feels like the worst time I've ever had. So I think it's important to, like you say, start with start with where we are. Because I always say menopause will set you free, but it will really mess with you first. So we have to be present to what was happening, and, and not be down on ourselves for the fact that we're not blissfully sailing through, because it doesn't usually work that way. There are some women, I've actually met a couple who sailed through with, they didn't even notice it. That's not the norm for most of us. And I think there's a gift in that, though. When things are that cataclysmic, it forces you to pay attention in a way that you might not have. And then you go, wait, everything's changing. What does that mean? What are changes down the line that I might like to make? And I will preface that by saying, when you're in the worst throes of the physical, emotional crisis, it's not the time to make big decisions. I'll feel better if I move halfway across the world. I have to move. I have to change my job. I have to change my spouse. I have to. We wouldn't let a kid in puberty make those kind of big decisions. So it's not the time. Wait, give yourself space. Take good care of yourself. You'll know if those are really true things that have to happen, or whether it was just the chaos that you were trying to get a handle on and make some control over. I think surrender is probably a really good thing in the very beginning. Don't try to control everything. And I'm saying that as a control freak. So
in a smaller or bigger scale, it's, yeah. No, this is for sure. So in what ways how did you handle your personal relationships and how you were coming up? So you talked about anger, and you talked about all of you agreeing at some point that, well, what does this point back to me about all these anger issues? So how does this, where were you at that time when all these anger issues came up, and where are you today looking back, and how did that help you maybe address what was behind the anger and make you more at peace with yourself? Because being angry, nobody, even if you are okay with anger, is not what we all want. So
yeah, I think particularly as women, we are used to not overtly expressing anger a lot of the time, and that's just, it's a little more okay, I think, for men somehow. But I think what happened for me is because I was becoming so tuned into all the symptoms, all the emotional symptoms and everything, that I would stand back and watch myself very carefully. And yes, I was much more irritable. Oh my gosh. But because that wasn't my usual, and the things I was getting irritable about were not things I ever was irritable about before. So that's a clue. So I'll give you an example. So we're on a trip down the Grand Canyon, down the river, which my husband and I have done multiple times. And our daughter was with us, and she was grown. She's like 20. And I remember his back was bothering him. So I was schlepping these big, heavy bags off of the boat up to our campsites. And I remember being particularly irritated that he couldn't do something to help. And I was just like, and I was telling my daughter, that I was really irritated. And I said, and then a friend overheard and said, well, I can help, I'm really good at mediating couples things. And I go, look, I have to sit with this a while because I am unclear at the moment whether my anger is legit or whether this is just something coming up that's been loosened up by menopause. And I have to sit with it. If it's real, if it's legit, if it still bothers me tomorrow, well, then I'll sit down and have a talk with it. If it doesn't, then I'm just as likely to go, oh, that was part of the generalized anger, not the anger that really was part of that event. So flash forward to another story. When I was telling you that we came up with against the anger issues, particularly in that week in Hawaii. So we all went down to an end of the island where there's a waterfall hike. And it's a not horribly strenuous hike, but there's a little bit of climbing over boulders at the end to get to the waterfall pool. But I never think of it as a big deal. My girlfriend was sick and I was sick, so we did not take the hike. So we were sitting there waiting for everybody to come back, and we'd been multiple times. I mean, we both live on the island, so we're like, yeah, no biggie. Well, when the women got back after about 3 hours, you could just feel the tension. It was really strong. And it turned out to be more strenuous than they thought individually. And lo and behold, they hadn't brought water or snacks, most of them. And so they were angry at my girlfriend who led them, like it was her fault because she didn't tell them to bring water or snacks. And so we had a really wonderful discussion, all of us, about whose responsibility is it to take care of yourself? How do we give that over time and time again? And it really turned out to be a huge turning point for some of the women where you go, oh my gosh, whose responsibility is it? Each of us. We're going on a hike. We know we're going. We know it's warm, it's Hawaii, and we don't take water or a snack. And we're looking for someone to blame? I don't think so. I mean, it was really a huge turning point. It was cataclysmic. And I think was one of our better exercises that wasn't planned, shall we say, that the universe provided. I think those things are important to really look at the emotions, look at the physical stuff, but really almost, stand a little bit outside yourself and watch, and even if you have to, if my girlfriend was telling me that this is how she felt or this was what was happening, in what way would I support her? How I should support me? We often don't think of supporting ourselves. And I think the anger, I have more anger and anxiety, which I'd never had before. Anxiety can be really hard to deal with, especially if you've never been anxious. Like, what is that about? And I think it really is a great deal hormonal and all the shifts that are happening. But again, then you start to learn, you go, well, I can watch this. How humorous is this? I'm lying awake at night wondering if I ordered enough cat litter. That's, and so when you look at it and step back a minute, you go, oh, that's just humorous. I'm just writing what I call the press, and it doesn't stop at rational thought. It doesn't. And if you can laugh at it and just go, I can see the difference between real and emotions that are just cropping up willy-nilly. And so it definitely requires some self-observation, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the number one. And the problem with all these things is also to go and look for help outside for your own body, for your own symptoms. And then whom do I ask? There's so many different options as well that are proposed. And you might be the natural one. You might be the one that, prefers to take things to calm things, to not have any symptoms. I mean, everything is fine, but how do you know what is right for you? And a very good thing again is, I think, what you said is that to come back to yourself, to find a little bit of inner space, inner calmness, to be able to figure out which direction to whom, or even when it comes to practitioners or whatever it is, or the people that you want to speak to. And usually because of the symptoms or because of everything that happens, it's a little bit, we're caught up in a storm, and then it's this movement. But I think it's really always to observe yourself. You need to just stop, stop and take some time, some space.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you said is really the best idea. And also, differentiating, well, this is natural and this is not. Just really let yourself feel what might be okay for you. Sometimes it's hormones, for at least for a short period of time. Apparently, if you take hormones for 3 to 5 years, there's no significant change in whether in you or someone who doesn't, in terms of side effects or reproductive. Obviously, if you have it in your family, no, you can't take hormones. But those kinds of things where, we go, oh, well, I remember one woman in a beauty parlor saying to me, I couldn't sleep. I was almost psychotic. So I caved. I took hormones. And I go, you didn't cave. You took care of yourself. That's not caving, and that's not a failure on your part. And I think there is some of that we put on ourselves. It's like, well, I should be able to get through this, and I should do it all naturally. And by the way, speaking of natural remedies, when we are in the throes of it, like you were talking about, there is a temptation to throw everything but the kitchen sink at it because we've got to make it stop. It's untenable. And that doesn't work. When you're trying natural remedies, you have to give them 4 to 6 weeks to work. Yeah. So you can't pile on. So it's going to take some time. You try one at a time. And, you can add and then try one more. But you can't just you'll have no idea what works. And you could actually throw yourself into more problems.
Yeah, for sure. And
I think it's important.
It is a process as well that lasts a few years. I mean, it's like adolescence, it's the adolescence, right? It's not like, okay, I have this is extreme, and then so remedies and how you cope with it to start with, but how you heal things or how you go deeper and everything, that also takes time. And that's something that I think we have a hard time because we live in fast-paced lives and there is no time to do anything, and you have 10 million other things to do. And there's always this, it's like we need to sculpt out of the calendar me time, like to be able to just sit and be, and without any agenda. I think that's a problem of our times as well. It's like an issue of life has gone faster and faster, and technology doesn't make it easier. Because I'd say, what do you think, like, of groups like you've had? Because you've kept your meetings for how many years? 15 years or so, or you kept meeting year after year?
10 or 15. I think maybe it was 13 total. I can't remember. And we've done some trips besides that together, just as friends.
That's quite a long time. And it was also, maybe that was a few years back, it was like the beginning. I mean, today with social media, with all the connection we've got, I'd say it was a more different paced world where meeting up in real was the best thing to do. And then we didn't have all these connections so fast, on our phones. Because I would say today that's what happens a lot, and that's a big distraction as well. It's a big distraction outside of ourselves. So maybe we do want to connect, but then it's a question that I ask myself, even for the work I do, because some women really like to, connection, the relationships, and at the same time, you need to have some space even in that, because it can be another one of those distractions, or it's a way to not face what you are called to face within. So it's well, I don't know what's your because maybe, yeah, by the time when you did this, then yeah, things have gone a bit faster in terms of communications. It's not necessarily better, but I do think that the physical meetings are always there is something that happens physically, like to have a weekend, or to have like the week that you had in Hawaii. That's it's just a container where, life just brings everything in, from each single woman, and then it's packed up, and it's so rich and fertile. But it's nearly a self-organized system that you describe, huh, Lynette? You didn't have I love it, because somehow you didn't, it was like it kind of auto-federated. You got together, and then you saw the value of this, then got away again, and then got back year after year, and bringing a full year of experience during these changes. So how, what I said in the beginning, these new pathways, these new ways of being, what was something that you saw happening for most of you, that was like something that was clearly a new sign that you were entering a new phase of your life, the second half, the famous from Jung, where up to 50 you just build up, and then you do the purging, and then that's when life starts, kind of. So what was some of the things that you would say, these new ways of being, that the Venuses, that these group of women that you came to know quite well? So
Yeah, so on our fourth meeting, which is a really pivotal meeting, the agenda had several things that we covered, but then the final part that we were speaking of on the last day was vision. What is the vision for the rest of our lives? And that was probably one of the most telling things that had happened to us. Because when the question was asked, there was dead silence. And let me just say, these are not women that are silent. Like, they have a lot to say. And finally, one of them said, grandchildren, like with a question mark after it. So clearly, we had been in the throes of what was happening. We had not really come to grips with the fact that we were facing the second half of our lives. And what was that going to look like? It seemed like everybody thought it would just happen to them, and then we would know. And so that was a huge turning point. And we spent that whole year thinking about, each of us on our own, what do I see? What do I want to see? What does it look like? And when we came back together, everybody had really thought about it. And we started to, everybody had a vision, or at least a beginning of a vision of, whether it was something they'd never done, that they'd always wanted to do, and we're ready to explore it. Well, one of the things that we came to is that you don't have to find that grand passion. I mean, by the time we're 50, we've done a lot, we've succeeded, we've had our families, what have you. And that was the time to say, I don't have to have a grand passion. I can have a lot of little passions, passionettes, be a purposeful dilettante, if you will, and enjoy that and see where that takes me. Because what we're doing, it's not so much about the thing we're doing, it's about how we're growing ourselves, how we're becoming who we would like to be. And that requires experimentation. And we decided that, you know what, we'll try anything, because even if we aren't good at it or we look stupid, who cares? That's not how we measure ourselves anymore. We're going to measure ourselves from an internal place, an internal compass, and we'll find our own true north. And it's not going to depend on anything that we don't have to be good at it. If we are good at it, we don't have to sell it. That's I find that is so pervasive. Like when my husband and I teach photo classes, the women that are really good, now their husbands want them to sell their work and make it pay for itself and da 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 da. It's like, my husband always says to them, "Oh, does your golf pay for itself?" And let us be artists. Let us be let us be professional amateurs. Somebody who does something for the love of it, which is what the word amateur comes from.
I love that.
So yes. So you don't have to sell it, and you don't have to do something with it. Our culture is so strange that way, I think.
Yeah.
And that you could just do it for the pure enjoyment, and you can give it away, or you can put it in the closet, or you can take it out and look at it once in a while. None of it is what is important. Is who are you becoming? And personally, I felt like becoming, for me, it was a state of being more present with what is. Really, gratitude probably being the bedrock of that. Being grateful, being kind, and honestly, when you were talking about social media and all of that, and how much it pulls on us, and how uber connected we might be, for me, it does mean purposely disconnecting. I like to spend time that is completely unstructured. And maybe I'll daydream, maybe I'll read, what have you. So much more comes out of that in terms of becoming, I think, than anything I could do.
Well, I'd say that's where creativity can emerge. In the unstructured, you need a container, but within the container, it has to be, unstructured is a very good way to start following your passion and seeing where it leads you, and not necessarily attaching this to, I don't know, results and money and everything. For sure, for sure. So, Lynette, if you met, and with this, I think we're coming to wrap up our conversation, which I thank you very much, because it's been very, very, very interesting. And I invite every woman to go and check up your menopausegoddessblog.com, right? I will put this in the link below. If you met women that are going through menopause in real, or if somebody came up to you and said, Lynette, what would be one or two things that really you have in your heart, you have them with you after this transition that you went through yourself and with the Venuses and your journey, what would it be?
Well, I would say, honestly, and this is pivotal, that, and I've said this over and over and over again so many times, that you can't underestimate the power of women getting together. And that so much so that we put on the blog how to create your own Menopause Goddess group. And it's funny how many women didn't want to do it because of two reasons. They didn't want to lead it. There's no leading. I mean, you can all come up with the agenda yourself. You don't have to have a leader. We're women. I mean, come on. Or they were afraid it would take too much time. And so that's really interesting, because Yes, there are a lot of demands on our time, but if you can set aside a day, a weekend, or an hour to meet and get together, and it has to be structured. It can't be what it usually degenerates into is like a bitch session or a fun session, or that's not productive. We have to have a focus. And I've been to some menopause cafe meetings, which it has just been very unstructured. And so it's just all over the place, just people talking about what have you. It doesn't get, for me personally, it doesn't get anywhere. I think the idea is really good. And maybe it's just the ones I visited were not focused enough. But I think it's really the best thing you can have on this journey is the support of other women. I cannot stress that enough. So that's the first. And the second is because you'll figure out the physical and the emotional symptoms. And obviously, if they're interfering with daily life significantly, then it's time to call in professional help. Most definitely. I met a woman who was like a high-powered woman from Washington, D.C., a lobbyist, I think she was. And she said, I don't know, I'm so depressed, I can't get out of bed in the morning. And I go, that's not normal menopause. That requires professional help, and you need to go now. So, it's okay to cry at tired commercials. It's not okay not to be able to get out of bed. That requires a higher level of care and self-care. So I think probably the second thing besides having other women is, and it sounds like, not a big deal, but it's huge, is to be gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's enormous. I think as women, we expect to carry the world, even if we say, well, I don't do that much, or it's not that much. Yes, it is. And be gentle with yourself. Say no sometimes. Say no more times. It gets easier with practice, actually. I actually have the perfect thing. If you're feeling bogged down and there's all these obligations and parties and this and that, and you feel like you should go because, connection, blah, blah. What I found quite by accident was when I wrote my first book, when I told people I was writing a book so I couldn't come to their event, they'd be like, oh, well, yeah, I totally get that. And I was like, all right, write it down on the word processor, my book by blah, blah, blah. And there you've started your book. And so you say, I can't, I'm working on my book. You're working on yourself. And you need to create that time for yourself without feeling guilty, without feeling like you're letting someone down. Put yourself first, I would say. Huge.
I think that's one of the big lessons of menopause anyway, to come back, to be able to reconnect, but from a place there's just get a bit more balance between things. And yeah. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk about all these things. And I don't know, we will probably meet on your blog at some point. Yeah.
Oh, I look forward to it. Yeah, it's been a joy, and I don't take it down because even I'm still writing, of course, but as things come up, everything anybody wants to know about any symptom, anything, just put it in the search box and bang, it comes up with everything that's related to that question. So you don't have to even do a lot of work. It's a great search thing on there. Thanks to my webmaster.
Excellent.
But yes, it's been a pleasure. And to all my premenopausal and menopausal and postmenopausal sisters, I wish you all the best. And get to know yourself, get to love her.
Thank you, Lynette.
And aloha.
And aloha.
You're welcome.
Thank you.